Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the Congressional Staffer Panel. I look forward to hearing from our amazing speakers and hearing about what they think about working on the Hill. Our speakers today are Tom Erb, who is a legislative assistant for Congressman Scott Peters from California. He covers energy, environment, and climate change for the congressman, including carbon pricing. Previously, he worked at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions and the World Bank. He is from Poway, California. Also, we have my predecessor, Adeline DeYoung. Adeline is a legislative assistant for freshman Rep. Teresa Fernandez, representing her home district in New Mexico. Before moving to the Hill, Adeline worked at CCL for 6 years, most recently as the Government Affairs Coordinator. I'll be asking Tom and Adeline questions that I am curious about myself, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience later. Tom and Adeline, if you guys have anything you'd like to share, a few brief introductions would be great.
Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be back and talking to CCLers and being able to bring you guys some perspective now from my time on the Hill. So happy to be here, and thanks for having us, Jamari.
Good to be here with everyone. See lots of folks from San Diego, which is exciting. Yeah, great to be here. I got started in my climate policy carbon pricing journey with CCL several years back. So it's good to be talking with all of you, and just want to say thank you for all your work and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So the first question I have up is, we all know COVID has changed the way we all work for our day-to-day. Can you tell us a little bit how it changed within Congress and how you guys are working from the day-to-day nowadays?
I can start. I mean, and I know both for Tom and myself that we both started on the Hill while COVID was already happening. So I don't know if I can speak too much about how it changed from before, but I just know that, of course, we're just now starting to go back in person, but everyone's been remote. So, of course, meetings are remote. I think it's made for us to be able to have a lot more meetings, and also great that we can meet with constituents all the time, which is really nice that people don't have to fly all the way to DC to be able to meet with them. But I do know that it's made our schedules, I think, even a bit busier, especially for the member, that since she's able to jump on so many meetings, she just has so many meetings on her schedule all the time and is constantly hopping from one call to the next. So I can say that it's definitely made for us to be very busy.
Yeah, we're both newbies, so don't have full context here for the Hill. I just started a month ago. But I would say two things in this regard. One is just access to your boss. And every boss is different. Representative Peters is very staff facing, so he likes working with staff, and it's just a lot harder sometimes when he's out and about and things like that, and we're not as connected, not in the office with him. Second is just relationship building in general. So much of trying to pass policy is, one, relationships with stakeholders like you all, but also just relationships with other offices. So a big challenge, and I'm sure Adeline probably relates to this as well, is trying to meet our fellow colleagues in other offices that we want to work with, committee staff, and it's really hard to form those relationships over Zoom calls or whatever it may be. So that's a challenge, but working through that. And yeah, I think we're starting to go back to a more in-person setting. So we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I worked previously for Congressman Paul Cook, and I worked for Congressman Paul Cook, and working on the Hill before COVID, it was very lively, and then I was a staff assistant and legislative correspondent. So after COVID, we got moved to taking phone calls remotely, and I think that was a big challenge in itself. And I feel what you guys are going through right now, and I'm sure it's extremely difficult. So I kind of wanted to get into what are some common misconceptions that people have about congressional staff, and how can we combat these misconceptions and communicate more effectively?
I can start on this one, and just want to say hi to Meg, who's in the chat in Claremont. She's a force to be reckoned with in Claremont, so hi, Meg. Good to see you there. So two things here again. I think people often assume we know more than we actually do. We're covering a lot of different issues, trying to keep track of a lot of different things. So I think it's easier to assume we don't know and explain things in more straightforward, simple ways than assuming we do know things and trying to be respectful of whatever that may be. So, just coming from an honest point and just saying things like, if I'm telling you stuff you already know, stop me, but make sure you kind of start with square one because that's helpful. And then the second thing is CCL is very good at this, but just assuming that we have more time than we do. So just always being respectful of time, whether it's meeting requests for the boss, whatever it may be, super slammed for time. So the more you can show kind of directly your ability to respect our time, and then also through things like agenda setting, sending questions ahead of time, just being very well prepared, that is seen as very respectful. It helps us a lot, and you're going to get more meetings if that's how you approach them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Tom had to share there. I would also say that one thing that I personally had the misconception, and I'm sure a lot of CCL volunteers do as well, is that if I emailed a staffer and they didn't get back to me, I would feel personally offended and think that they saw my email and didn't respond. But the reality is, we get hundreds of emails every day, and it's so easy for things to get buried in our inbox. And so don't be scared to send a second and third follow-up email. That a lot of times it's not that, the staffer saw it and doesn't want to meet with you. It's just that, it might have gotten piled under a ton of other stuff that they're doing right then. So definitely send those follow-up emails. I never am annoyed for getting multiple emails on one meeting request. So please do that.
Yeah, plus you guys get a ton of phone calls and emails every day, so I'm sure it's hard to filter through your inbox. So I know, you guys have kind of just gotten to start on the Hill, but what's surprising thing has happened during the time you guys were working, especially working with a new Congress?
I don't know if this is exactly aligned with your question, but something that has surprised me as a new staffer is how quickly you can transition from some of the, for lack of a better word, political BS that you see sometimes back to bipartisan lawmaking. So just within a given hearing, we just had one in the Energy and Commerce Committee, or our markup on some cybersecurity bills, on a methane bill, and the methane bill was very political. So you had some of our friends on the Republican side basically delaying, talking about meeting in person. And then you get past that and you pass for, bipartisan cybersecurity bills. So it's kind of interesting, the ability to do bipartisan things, even in a climate that is extremely partisan and seems extremely partisan, especially from the outside. So, I don't know exactly what to make of that, but even in very partisan moments, there's opportunities for bipartisan breakthroughs.
I would actually echo that as well. I know for committee hearings, so we'll be in on the Zoom room, and before the hearing goes live and they get to serious business, it's a lot of the members chit-chatting and talking to each other, and it's actually a lot less contentious than I think the media and even sometimes just watching the actual hearing would lead you to believe. And there is, even working for a very progressive Democrat, we're constantly on any bill that we can trying to find Republican co-sponsors. And I think that, with a lot of members, there still very much is an effort to do things in as much of a bipartisan way as we can.
Yeah, thank you for that. One thing I wanted to know is how can groups like CCL make the lives of congressional staffers easier?
I was going to say, I think Tom made a really great point earlier about the never assuming that staff are experts. I personally handle 13 issue areas. So for someone that isn't already familiar with carbon pricing, I think it's always good to start a meeting out with, asking how familiar they are with the policy. And I think CCL is really great at always doing this. But, even with a staffer that you may have met with before, it's just always great to have a refresher. I think that's always helpful. As well as it's really nice to get prepared, any materials in advance. It's kind of nice to know if there is going to be a main ask, a summary of what bill you're going over, at least the bill numbers that you're going to be asking about, things like that. Having those in advance are really helpful, so you can just have them pulled up during the meeting.
Yeah, and the fact that CCL is hosting this session means you all are thinking about this. And one thing that I would recommend is just thinking politically and strategically in these meetings. So, often, as you all know, members are convinced less by substance and more by politics or key messengers or constituents. So just understanding the people who the staffer and the member is going to listen to and trying to utilize them as opposed to, you could just send reports and data and all the evidence for why carbon pricing is great, but that's not really going to get through most often, but rather kind of working with key constituents or groups or just respected messengers for them is really useful. And then the next thing is just making asks as simple as possible. So Scott, my boss, as you all know, loves carbon pricing, talks about carbon pricing as much as he can. I call him a carbon pricing shill. Keep that between us, though. But he loves carbon pricing. He's all in. But on a different issue, it's very hard for staffers and members to spend a lot of time, thinking about the substance of it. So just make sure your asks are as targeted as possible, as easy as possible for the staffer, and the message is as clear as possible as far as who's supporting it that you think will be influential to them.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to ask you guys, how is it that you guys prioritize your constituents? I know you guys both have different constituents, but what are some of the things that catches your eye when it comes into your
I mean, just constituents in general catch my eye. I have so many groups reaching out that don't have ties to the district or just, DC think tanks and something, that we've been explicitly instructed by our member of Congress is to, never deny a meeting with constituents, to prioritize this meeting with constituents, especially if there's, multiple of them in that meeting. But yeah, we definitely, having constituents in a meeting is key and makes it so that our ears are going to perk up and we're going to listen. In my office, at least, we have a priority that, if we have a meeting with constituent and they bring up a specific bill, like we're going to look into that bill. We don't just ignore what our constituents bring up.
Definitely constituents, that's a filter. There's so many things we get sent and the filter is always constituents. Beyond constituents, this kind of goes back to what I was just saying, but it's really important to know, and you can ask staff for this. I would be honest if constituents ask me this, like what moves my boss? What does my boss care about? Who does he listen to? So in my example, Congressman Peters is like an academic intellectual. So he's going to listen to a scientist before he, listens to maybe someone else or an academic or an economist. Like that's going to appeal to him. Then you should think about how they think, right? So my boss, again, he's going to be more convinced about the economic efficiency of carbon pricing, the revenue generation for other things, whereas another boss might be convinced by something else. So, knowing how they think, who they listen to, the kind of trusted messengers again. And the last thing is I will prioritize people who seem well prepared and are going to be respectful of time and are going to run an efficient meeting. So CCL has already done this. Shout out to the San Diego chapter, and scheduling a meeting 6 weeks out. That's very useful because I'm not thinking 6 weeks out, and it seems like my calendar is wide open. If you ask me for a meeting on Tuesday, there's just no way. So thinking ahead, having an agenda, having a clear ask, and all those other things are really helpful.
And do you guys think there's a difference in terms of local leaders of an influence within your congressional offices compared to constituents individually?
I'd say it's complex and case by case. I think this is one of the questions, Jamari, you sent ahead of time, and I hope we get to this question later, but just as a sneak peek, was like how NGOs could improve or what NGOs are not doing well. I think assuming politics is simple is a mistake. So, you watch West Wing or whatever show and you think it's like, if you work with companies, big companies, people will listen to them. Well, maybe, but honestly, neither party is really big fans of big companies right now. So same with local leaders. Like Scott has great relationships with local leaders in San Diego, so that would definitely be influential to him, but they might be rivals or for whatever reason. I think understanding that a lot of politics can be pretty petty, and there just can be like battles between people or people who don't want to work with someone because they don't like them. That's very real, unfortunately. So you have to understand that. And then the last thing that I was going to bring up on this is friendships among local leaders and members or between members is really important. And that can play into people's decisions about how much they support something, whether they're speaking out versus doing it behind the scenes. So trying to identify members and staffers, offices they often work with, things like that is very useful.
Yeah, definitely everything Tom just said. I would also add that I would guess that Tom and I are more unique in that we both work for the member of Congress that represents our home district and might have a better idea of who those local leaders are. But so many people on the Hill. I think in my office, I'm actually one of the only staffers that is from the specific district. So making sure that if you're going to bring a local leader, explain exactly why they're important to the office. Say like they represent this district. It's within your member of Congress's district, or it's this business person. They employ these many people in the district from this town. So just make sure that you're making it like as specific as possible of why that person should be important to the member of Congress.
Yeah, and Tom kind of touched on this. I just wanted to see what are some of the things that are least helpful from NGOs and trade associations for congressional offices.
We could be here all day, unfortunately. This is not about CCL. CCL is great. You guys have nailed this. One thing, this is the flip side of this, but I think how this works generally, and again, I'm a month in, so take this with a grain of salt, but when we get an issue we work on, and Adeline has 14 different issue areas, I'm realizing I'm very lucky with my 7 or 8. But let's take carbon pricing, take methane, my boss works on transmission. Usually what a staffer is looking for, if it's a priority of their boss, is one organization or a trusted, someone who they can work with on all the hard stuff, right? So this is giving them the political intel that they're getting. It's helping with talking points. It's helping with drafting bill text. It's getting research on things. It's talking to constituents. Like, that is the person that you want to be in a congressional office to that staffer. So on carbon pricing, there's a ton of different groups that work on carbon pricing. You want to build a relationship, and that's where it starts first with me or with Adeline or with whoever, and be that trusted resource. So when the person needs to trust someone on carbon pricing, and if we do a full push for carbon pricing, like, you're the person they're leaning on to help them. So something that will go a long way in helping that is small favors. So just being willing to introduce them to someone and being proactive about, hey, saw your boss talking about X, here's an article I saw on it. Or like little things like that show that you're very committed and willing to help and are definitely not annoying. So that is the secret on, you all are lobbyists, but a lot of people think that lobbyists are effective because of all the money that floats around, and that definitely plays a role. But in my first month, lobbyists are effective because they know exactly what a Hill staffer needs, and they're very good at giving it to them exactly how they need it. So it's what people in the district are saying, it's the key messengers and what they're saying, it's the bill text, and it's like, here's what you need to do, and they make it very easy. So as much as you can do that, you're going to have more influence with that staffer in office.
Yeah, I would definitely echo all of that. I think as much as you can be as specific as possible is the best thing that you can do. I think when constituents or groups reach out and they say, I know that your boss is going to be sitting in on this hearing on this topic next week, like, let me know if you need any resources in that. Like, that's so helpful. Or, just sending those resources, just like knowing what's going on in that office, knowing like, oh, hey, this bill is going to be considered in a week. Like, can we help, educate you on that? Do you have any questions about that? That's so helpful. I think the things that, I just I have too much in my inbox and I can't pay attention to is when a group just sends a very general report, doesn't, say why it's important to my boss, like what it's specifically tied to that's going on in the Hill right now. That is something that I generally like. If I don't know why it's important and you don't make it obvious that it's important to me, I'm just not going to have time to prioritize it.
Yeah, I definitely think that going into congressional offices and always communicating with congressional staff and building a rapport definitely helps in terms of them always looking at you as a resource. So on that note, I'm done with my questions. I'm happy to go through the Q&A questions. So we have the first question here is from Linda. Linda asks, she's curious about how much staffers from Republican offices and from Democratic offices talk to one another, especially with everything that happened after January 6th.
Well, I think Tom brought this up in that, it's hard to talk to any office since we're all remote. So there's that already. But as far as, we talk to Republican offices plenty when it's, about specific bills that we're trying to partner on. So I think sort of in that way, maybe it's less contentious in that like when we are talking, it's about something that we already agree with that office on. So yeah, I haven't come across any Republican staffers that I have hard feelings against. And yeah, anytime that we've talked with Republican staffers, it's always very friendly and everyone, we're all working on the Hill together. But yeah, it is also just in being remote, it's, we're not able to meet with a lot of offices and get to know a lot of the other staffers. So that's something that, I'm sure we're all looking forward to being in person and getting to hang out with the other staffers more.
Yeah, in general, it's more political on CNN and Fox News and on Twitter than it is in real life. And then my second recommendation is to not get your political knowledge from Twitter. That is also not real life. So to answer the question specifically, this also depends on your boss. So my boss wants to work with Republicans as much as possible. We recognize that to get things done, we can't do reconciliation every single time. We need to have bipartisanship. We need to get things done. So whether we like it or not, and we do like it, we want to work with Republicans. So a big part of my first month has been forming relationships with staffers on the Energy and Commerce Committee, my bosses who are on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and really just trying to identify, where Republicans are coming from on climate and how can we work together on some, key things going forward. So for example, they talk a lot about critical minerals and permitting and natural gas. So how can we find ways to do that in a climate smart way that actually makes sense? So, I think I have a mandate to be able to do this, but it really depends office by office. And there certainly is more challenges now after January 6th. So I don't want to downplay that at all.
Okay. The next question we have, it's been from a few people, Don and a couple others, in terms of how our congressional offices kind of prioritizing and evaluating phone calls and emails from constituents. I know when I was there, we were using IQ and Fireside in terms of trying to, and I know it's more of a question for, the comms department or the press secretary or staff assistant, but if from what you guys know, how do you guys evaluate?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And this would be a better question for like our legislative correspondent, handles all this, but every week on our staff lead call with the Congresswoman, she goes over what have been the highlights for the past week from calls and emails and web form submissions from constituents. And so she's always highlighting, these are the bills that came up the most, these are the topics that people are concerned about, and that's every single week. And then we also, as legislative staffers, have at least an hour set aside every week to be returning calls to constituents that, either wrote in on our website or called into the office about a specific issue that, requires attention. So that's something that our office is definitely paying attention to. And if, enough people are writing in about something, it's going to be brought to the attention of the Congresswoman.
Yeah, our LC Dillon would be a better response here, but echoing what Adeline said, every week, and more so even recently, Representative Peters has really been asking what people are talking about in San Diego. So the more you can put this on our staffer and our team's radar and his radar, it's certainly going to be on the top of his priority list. So, continuing to send in emails and make calls and build relationships with staffers is absolutely important. And
it also touches on another question we have from Joshua. Is there such a thing as being too persistent in constituents calling? I know I've had constituents call a lot, so I know how passionate people can get. So definitely, is there such thing as being too persistent?
I would be strategic. So if you're writing a letter that is not politically filtered or aware of what's currently going on in Congress, and it's the same letter week after week after week, it's going to be desensitized. So, you can write as much as you want, but you should tailor it to what staff and what the boss is thinking about, right? So, if it's carbon pricing, for example, maybe instead of writing like, we should support the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act every single week, which, Scott's already supportive of, maybe write like, hey, the next time that Representative Peters is talking about the infrastructure bill on a major news outlet, which he did today, like he should mention carbon pricing as a pay for or something like that for infrastructure. Just like targeting it towards the current discussion is going to get you more attention, and you're going to be less annoying if you do it that way.
Yeah, exactly that. Also, if you're going to be asking about the same bill over and over, definitely, tying it to, hey, this just happened in the district and this is the reason why you should support this bill. Like, here's this report that just came out from some national organization. This is why you should support this bill. So just always changing it up. I would definitely stray away from leaving the same message over and over again if it's from the same person. But I do think if 100 constituents reach out all asking to support one bill, we're definitely going to be paying attention to that. But yeah, if it's one person over and over, make sure that, you're changing up your messaging every time. You're highlighting some other reason why this bill is important, or especially as Tom put it, like different ways that your member of Congress can, if they're already supporting the Energy Innovation Act, how they can support it in different ways, or if you're trying to get them on, just different reasons that they should support.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. Rick asks, do staffers have time? Do you guys usually have time to read materials that were emailed to you, or materials that I know you guys haven't been working before COVID, but in terms of materials that are dropped off, do you guys usually have time to read those?
No.
I try to, if a group sent materials to read before a meeting, I try to, but if I'm being honest, a lot of times it's, 5 minutes before the meeting starts, like, let me skim through this document really quick and pick out what they're already going to talk about, just, so that I can highlight things that the Congresswoman is already doing on that front. But it's definitely helpful. And it's also very helpful, especially to be able to look at those things during the meeting. So, even if staffers, it doesn't seem like they're able to look over your documents that you've sent beforehand, I would still continuing to do that, because it's great to be able to reference them during the meeting regardless.
Yeah, and I'd say it depends on your relationship with the office, right? So if you're one of those people I mentioned before who the staffer is really leaning on for things, like, absolutely, right? You're going to be the person that they're going to read all the information. So in that case, like, yes, they're going to prioritize that. The second is if it's very targeted at a priority of their boss. So, if it's someone who isn't thinking about carbon pricing at all, the material is going to be less important than building a relationship with that person so they get to the point of reading the material. So it has to be a priority of the boss most of the time to prioritize it. And then if you're close to the office, then yes, it's absolutely very useful.
Awesome. Wow. Well, thank you both for taking the time out from your Saturdays to sit down and tell us exactly what a congressional staffer does. I appreciate it a ton, and I'm sure everyone else in here does as well. The work that you guys do is undervalued and underappreciated. So thank you guys so much for sitting down and talking to me, and letting the volunteers and everyone else on the call hear what you guys have to say. So
thanks, Jamari. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good luck on your lobby day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.